va a llegar el gol del Arsenal. Özil, marca Mesut Özil.
Pasó Guendouzi, Pepe.
This is Arsecast Extra.
Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always with James from Gunnerblog. James, goodly Friday unexpected morning to you.
Goodly unexpected morning to you too. Yeah, this is a surprise Arsecast Extra.
Yeah, it is a bit. It's not going to be the usual Arsecast Extra where we do it in two parts and we take questions and all that kind of stuff. But yesterday, I put together my podcast, episode 550 of the Arsecast, which you can listen to right now wherever you get podcasts. And we discussed all that went on at Arsenal this week with Charles Watts, and we talked about Xhaka. And at that point, there had been no communication whatsoever from Granit Xhaka about what had happened against Crystal Palace on Sunday. So did the podcast, finished it, uploaded, scheduled the posting and everything else. And within about 90 minutes, Granit Xhaka had released a statement, which was really, really inconsiderate of him, I have to say.
Yes, it was very annoying of him. I, too, had spent quite a lot of time writing an article that was mainly along the lines of Xhaka having resisted the club's urging to put out a statement all week, which does remain the case, but then he put one out just as I was about to click publish. So Thanks very much, Granit. You created some more work for me there. But at least something has been said. At
least something has been said. Yes, okay. So what is... I don't know quite where to start with it, but I think the first thing that strikes me is that this was a statement released on Granit Xhaka's Instagram, rather than, as you would expect, via an official club channel or a statement on the website. When things like this have happened before, the statement usually comes, and the convention is that the statement comes via an official club channel, and that has not been the case.
Yeah.
So, your thoughts on that? Because we have heard this week that they wanted him to make a statement. He refused and has been refusing. They wanted him, apparently, to resign the captaincy, and he's refused to do that. And then we have a statement that comes out via his own social media channel. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a divergence between the club and the player over how they wanted this kind of conciliatory message to be expressed. And I think that's ended up showing itself in the fact that Xhaka's done it personally. I mean, I know the club reposted it on their social media accounts, but this was a Xhaka statement and not an Arsenal statement. And, you know, that tallies with pretty much everything I've heard this week about Xhaka's state of mind. He's still quite angry, I think. And I think, you know, the club have sort of used the line that he's maybe more sad. I'm sure he is sad, but I think he's still pretty angry. And I think you can sense that maybe in his statement. Yeah,
for sure. One thing I think is quite interesting in this as well is that there seems to be a bit of a divergence between the German statement and the translation into English, which I think is worth exploring. If you follow Swissgooner on Twitter, he's at A Mackenzie, and the I in Mackenzie is a 1 at the end. He talks about how it sounds better in German. The English translation says, "I'm sorry if that's what people thought," and in German it says, "That was not my intention and I am sorry," which of course is far better than that, like, well, I apologize to anybody who was offended by that, rather than saying sorry for what it is that you do.
Yeah.
You know, as I'm not obviously a native German speaker, what I would ask or question here is, given the importance of this statement, that it's come 4 days after Granit Xhaka stormed off the pitch against Crystal Palace and behaved, I think, you know, we've talked about why he perhaps was driven to behave in that way. It doesn't alter the fact that that behaviour was wrong. I think it was really, really important for whatever message he put out, whenever he put it out, to be as clear as possible. And it looks like he's written a statement in German and they've done a kind of translation job which doesn't match up to that. I do wonder a bit about that as to, like, who's advising him here. Because it suggests, does it not, that this statement was not run past the club before it went out? Because I do think if the communications department at the club had a look at that before it went out, they would have said, no, you probably shouldn't put that out.
Yeah, well, we can't speculate on, how that was translated. What I would say is it is a strange translation. With my rudimentary knowledge of German, I find it surprising that that's how it's come out at the other end. I'm not even sure. I mean, I'm tempted to get Google Translate up and put in the German and see if that's what people thought comes out the other side, because I suspect it wouldn't. So yeah, I do think you're right. I think if the club had done it, they would have done it in a more thorough manner. You have to say, and that there wouldn't have been, well, I guess it would have been in English, but there wouldn't have been this room for discrepancy between the two.
Yeah.
And it is an important distinction. I mean, saying I'm sorry if that's what people thought and I'm sorry are distinct, aren't they? They are different things. And to be honest, I don't think this is a mea culpa, is it? It's not really a full apology. It's an apology to certain fans and not others, as far as I see it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted sentence. He says, in this is the English translation, of course, which is what we have to work off. And to be fair, this is what Granit Xhaka put out there. He said in this situation, he talked about, reaching boiling point when he felt rejection in the stadium on Sunday. And, we can all identify with that. But he said, in this situation, I let myself be carried away and reacted in a way that disrespected the group of fans that support our club, our team, and myself with positive energy, which kind of sounds like he's making a distinction between, abusive fans or negative fans and the ones who are fully positive. It lacks clarity, doesn't it? It really does, because it's so, you could interpret that as to say, well, I disrespected the fans who are positive all the time, or I disrespect the fans who are, of a positive disposition. Does that mean you're lumping, for example, people who are critical in with the rest of them? It's clarity and communication is really important, and I think that part of the statement leaves it open to questioning. Yeah.
I think so. I'm just trying to look at the German now and see if I can unpick it, but my German is not good enough. I mean, definitely that translation in English of that thing we were just saying about I'm sorry is so odd that it almost feels like the English statement has been slightly tweaked to mean something altogether different. In this instance, my interpretation was definitely, to paraphrase, I'm sorry to those fans who are always positive. I let them down. Those fans who aren't always positive, well, I think that is a different matter in his mind. And of course, again, we are second guessing what positive or has positive energy means. Someone can have the best will in the world, but it doesn't mean that they don't sometimes lose their rag, or they don't sometimes get frustrated. It's not a case that any fan who's ever gone, oh, for fuck's sake, when someone's missed a chance, is not a positive supporter,
And, you could also make the case that the fans who were urging Xhaka to get off the pitch quickly were positive in the sense that they wanted the change to be made for the benefit of the team. It is quite layered and quite nuanced, and look,
for example, if he'd been more specific, if he'd said, to the fans who sort of booed me and tried to get me off the pitch in a hurry because we were chasing 3 points, I'm sorry. To the fans who ironically cheered when my number went up, you could still all go and fuck yourselves. I would kind of have more understanding and time, and it'd be more specific, but it's pretty vague at the moment,
Yeah. Another thing that strikes me is there is no mention really of the club itself. There's no mention of his role as captain, the extra responsibility that comes with that role. Whether, whether people agree with that or not, being captain of a football club, whether it's Arsenal or anything else, you have an extra layer of responsibility because you've been given it. You have literally been given that by the club. As a leader, as a figurehead, as a spokesperson, as somebody who should set the right example on and off the pitch, and we know that captains don't always do that. And Arsenal have had captains in the past who haven't done that. Even one of our greatest captains, had his own checkered history with some off-pitch behaviour. So it's not like. It's not like he would be the first or the last to have an indiscretion as a captain, but I found it strange that in a statement which very strongly revolves around his role, and he, threw the armband down on the ground when he was taken off. And, I guess it depends how much stock you put in the armband itself. Is it sacrosanct? Is it somehow sacrilegious to throw the armband on the ground? It really depends. But it's part of it. It is a big part of it. And I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't any mention of that within the statement.
Yes, I agree. There's no sort of sense of, I recognise that in my role I have a broader responsibility. I think there are a couple of things there. The first is that my understanding is that Xhaka is pretty pissed off about how he actually came to be awarded the captaincy. I've written about it in my column today, so you can find that on my Twitter timeline. But basically, the prevarication of Emery, the delay, the fact that he spoke to at least one other candidate about potentially taking on the armband before ultimately Xhaka was appointed, has left the player feeling that undermined his position. So I do wonder if there is a bit of resentment there around, the fact that the way that this all played out. I think the second thing is that Xhaka seems to regard himself as a captain for the players, principally. He is a guy who, is someone who leads the players, who is the person who they look to correspond with the manager, to deal with, things off the field. But he doesn't seem to necessarily embrace the wider role. He's happy to be the guy who's the spokesperson for the players, but does he realise that he's also got to be the figurehead for the club more broadly? And that doesn't seem to come through in his statement, as far as I can see.
No, well, there's no mention of it. There's literally no mention whatsoever of the captaincy, and how the fact that he is the captain has made his actions resonate even further. Like, if this was a player, if this was a regular player who had behaved in the way that Xhaka had behaved, it wouldn't have been quite as big a deal. I tell you, go on.
Yeah, I agree. But does it feel like such a big deal to be captain when there are five of you?
That's a good point, yeah.
Maybe it dilutes the honour, and maybe that feeds into this idea of it not being paid enough respect. We can look at him chucking it to somebody else and say, oh, that's disrespectful, but it is going to get chucked to someone else every other game, when we've got five captains. So, where I'm getting to with this, and there is no mention of the manager in the statement, and I feel that's telling. I think...
Yeah.
For all the criticism of Unai Emery, of Granit Xhaka, that's quite the Freudian slip. I don't think that Unai Emery is blameless in this, really, and I definitely think his management of the player and the situation has contributed to where we are now.
Yeah, I just want to make the point before we go on with this discussion that we're not really mentioning the abuse that he talks about in the statement, because we've been over that. We've been over it on Monday. I wrote about it in the blog today and during the week. I spoke about it on the podcast earlier today, that it should be taken as read that anybody who said those things towards Granit Xhaka is behaving in a way that is completely and utterly unacceptable, and nobody should be subjected to that kind of abuse. Certainly not a footballer that you don't like, just because you don't like the way he turns in midfield, or the fact that he's a bit clumsy or a bit slow or gives away penalties. None of that justifies that kind of behavior or those kind of interactions. So I just want to say that, because we're taking it as read that everybody is on the same page when it comes to that.
I think so. Everyone is on the same page. I mean, just on that, I think you wrote this morning about the distinction between fans who behave like that and most fans, and I think that is absolutely right. I do think as well, though, that it can feel amorphous, and I can't imagine what it is to be a Premier League footballer, but I do know that if somebody gives you a bit of stick online, that it stands out so much more than everything else. And if you happen to see it, I can understand an emotional reaction that sort of blends support in a way that's not helpful.
Look, I do understand that to an extent, but look, you and I have been doing what we do for a long time, and we've been online for a long time and on Twitter for a long time, and there are people who don't agree with us, and even today I've had people who don't necessarily agree with everything that I've written, but they've been respectful in the way that they interact, and that's great, and I'm absolutely on board with that. I don't expect anybody or everybody to agree with everything I say, and if people disagree, it's great to hear other points of view, and it's great to look at things from a different angle. Also, though, I've had people, and I'm sure you've had people who've been abusive, who've been downright nasty in some of the things that they've said to me and about me and what have you. And it's really not nice. I'm not saying it's nice, because you do. It's like anybody who puts something out there into the world, you look at the one bad review and that sticks in your mind far more than everything else. Yeah, I think that's just kind of human nature.
It is.
But when that happens, it doesn't occur to me, or it doesn't make me think, well, all Arsenal fans think I'm this, that, or the other, or they think I'm whatever. You do take it personally, I guess, and it can cut you and it can hurt your feelings. But for me, it wouldn't necessarily colour my perception or my opinion of everybody else out there who interacts with me, No,
it might not. But I think your opinion can get distorted. I'm thinking, for example, let's say of Instagram and Granit Xhaka. I don't know, at one point he had his comments open and he was getting a lot of abuse on there. And maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like human nature is such that if Granit Xhaka sort of has a fine game, there are less people who are going to go to his Instagram and say,
sure,
well done, mate. You did okay today. The sort of the badness, the vilification somehow rises to the surface more obviously, even if it's from a minority.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's part of human nature. How many people listening to this have had countless excellent experiences in the service industry, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a travel, whether it's a restaurant or a bar or whatever it might be, and you have countless of these perfectly acceptable, sometimes very good experiences with people and services and products and all that kind of stuff, and you never say a word about it. But the minute something goes wrong, or the minute you have a negative experience, the reaction is to go crazy and to complain and to say this is a disgrace and this is unacceptable. And maybe the thinking needs to change. Maybe all of our thinking needs to change. Maybe we need to be a bit more positive about the things that happen on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it's nice to leave a positive review for something rather than just sit there and be negative about stuff. So, look, I get it. There's often more to say when things are going wrong. Certainly from a footballing point of view.
I think we are essentially saying the same thing, which is that it is a real minority. And actually, the thing is, the most of the fans who sort of booed what happened with Xhaka in the stadium on Sunday are probably within that very reasonable category of fans. I think their issue with him in that moment was reasonable. It's not fair or correct to conflate those people with people sending death threats. It's
of course
not what's going on. But I think that in the player's mind, I can also understand how sometimes those things might become a bit muddled or confused, or some sense that they somehow feed each other. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
Maybe. Look, if he was, look, I don't think Granit Xhaka is blind or deaf to the fact that he's been the target of some criticism this season. And I think we talked about this on the podcast before. I was quite surprised at how much it ramped up. I think I said this to you, that like, I get it if you don't rate Xhaka as a player. You might want something different from our midfield. You know, I'm one of those people who would like to see Torreira and Guendouzi get a run of games in the Premier League. But I was quite surprised at how quickly this vitriol built up this season. And look, maybe it coming to a head, whether it works out well in the long run for Xhaka at Arsenal or not, maybe it's not, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but maybe it had to get to a point where it's addressed and a decision is made and we move on in some ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's been building and building and building.
Well, I think the captaincy was sort of petrol on that fire. And actually, I would say, if you look back at Xhaka's time at Arsenal, I think it's really quite possible to make an argument that he has started every season at Arsenal significantly worse than he started this one. I know he gave away the penalty against Spurs, but I seem to recall that in each of his previous years, he was giving away goals left, right and centre at the start of the season.
Yeah.
And there were sort of discussions of, well, you know, we know he grows into the campaign, he gets better as it goes on, he always starts slowly.
He's a second half of the season player.
Yeah, but this year, I think he's been kind of average, really. I mean, not diabolical, but, you know, there is that weight of sentiment that has built up now. And like I say, I do think the captaincy was a real catalyst here. And you know, and that's where the focus comes around, where we were sort of slightly leaning the conversation before, I think, on the head coach.
So how much of this do you actually put on Emery? Well, okay, not this. Okay, that's not right to say, but the way that we've dealt with it as a club, what are your thoughts on that? Because here we are on the eve of a game against Wolves. We don't know if Xhaka is going to be in the squad. We don't know if he's going to retain the captaincy. We don't know if he's going to play. We don't really know what the club have tried to do to make this better. There was an interesting bit in an article today from Miguel Delaney in The Independent. Let me just see if I can find the bit here. He talks about the thing we talked about a bit earlier, about how, you know, he wasn't of a mind to sort of issue an unconditional apology or, you know. But then he said, those who know the player also dispute the image Emery painted of him as being upset, devastated and sad, as well as the idea that mental health is any kind of concern. Because Arsenal, I guess, put it out there this week, because there were stories that went out that they were going to offer Granit Xhaka counselling. And it seems somewhat at odds with what we're hearing from the Xhaka side of things. And certainly there's nothing in Xhaka's statement which references that in any way.
No, I mean, who knows if he would, if it were true.
Yeah,
I
true.
Suppose. But yes, I can only confirm that from people I spoke to who've spoken to Xhaka, you know, anger, as I said at the top of the show, was much more prominent in their words than sadness. And I do wonder, it feels almost like the club buying a bit of time. You know, I'm not questioning the veracity of what they were saying or how positive their intentions might have been, but clearly there has been a bit of a split in terms of how the club wanted to present this and how the player wanted to present this.
So does the player presenting it in his own way, seemingly, and I say seemingly, at odds with what the club wanted from him, where does that leave him, and where does that leave his relationship with Emery, and where does that leave his relationship with the club and, you know, his role as captain?
Well, I think it makes it tricky on the surface, but Xhaka has the support of a good chunk of the players. You know, I think there are people in the squad who are pretty unimpressed by what happened on Sunday, but I think the majority of them take Xhaka's side here and, really do respect him, irregardless of what any fan thinks. He is very valued and well thought of, and I think there is a strong sentiment within the squad that maybe he shouldn't be completely stripped of the captaincy. Now, whether that makes it right, I don't know, but he will feel strengthened by that. So there was a great line from Amy Lawrence earlier this week where she said, regarding sort of Mesut Ozil and Granit Xhaka, you could argue that to have one ostracised player is misfortune, to have two looks like carelessness.
Yeah.
And I do think that it would, that would be kind of mad if we saw another player who has sort of been perennially regarded as a bit of a teacher's pet, really, sort of Emery's favourite, to be kind of on the outside. That would speak volumes, wouldn't it?
It would a bit. I have to say, I think however you want to look at Xhaka's situation in mitigation, and, if he's a guy who reached breaking point and everything else, I do think there's a bigger issue, which is that this is the captain of the club behaving in a way that he shouldn't have behaved. And I think Emery's position within the dressing room is weak. It was weakened by his vote. It's weakened by the fact that the players seem to want Granit Xhaka to stay on as captain.
But if Emery's a strong manager, that doesn't matter. If Emery's in a powerful position, he strips Xhaka of that captaincy and the players, accept it. Yeah. I think the fact that he hasn't done that, or that to be fair, we have to look beyond Emery, and I think we have to look at Edu and Raul here too. They would doubtless have a say on this. I feel that Xhaka can't really continue as captain. That much is obvious. Even those who want Xhaka to kind of be rehabilitated and stay at Arsenal and be part of the team must accept that would be easier were the spotlight not slightly removed from him by taking the armband off him. It is an easy thing to do as well, because you've already got 4 captains waiting in the wings for that promotion. Hector Bellerin played a captain's role on Wednesday night at Anfield, making sure the players went over to the fans. That was a decent audition from him for the armband. So it's perfectly plausible to make that change. I think the fact he doesn't is part of the issue, that he is not decisive in certain key moments, and naming the captaincy in the first place is one of them. And that created and contributed to this mess, but not changing it now, I think is also on him. Expecting Xhaka to resign it, it's just delegating again, and it's not worked.
Yeah, but then you have to ask, why hasn't somebody at the football club who can overrule Emery? Because we have people who can do that. We've got Raul Sanyehi, who's the head of football, Edu, who's the technical director. Ultimately, those two guys have got more authority over club matters in general than Emery, who, I know we call him the manager all the time, but his title is his head coach.
Yeah.
So when it comes to making difficult decisions, if you've got a head coach who can't do it, or won't do it, or has put himself in a position where he can't do it, then it's incumbent on those people to make that decision. And I agree with you. I don't think Xhaka can or should continue as captain, because when I look at the reaction to the statement, and obviously it sparked a whole load of debate again this morning and last night when it went out, and that's why we're talking about it, the reaction has been very mixed. It hasn't produced any kind of consensus. Some people have gone, well, there's your apology. What more do you want? Other people have gone, that's not an apology. Get rid of him. Other people are saying, well, okay, it wasn't an apology, but I kind of like what he said. If he didn't feel like apologizing, then that's fine. And look, I respect that. If you don't feel like apologizing, or you don't feel like you should apologize, don't apologize. And I think there's an element of that in Xhaka's statement, but you've got to own what you put out there. That if you really want to keep the captaincy, if you really want to mend fences, if you really want to make everything harmonious again, your statement is different than the one that he put out. So it felt a little bit like the kind of statement that's like absolutely putting the ball back in Arsenal's court when it comes to what happens next, whatever disciplinary action like in any other circumstance, a player coming off the pitch and taking his shirt off and telling the fans to fuck off would result in some kind of disciplinary action, some kind of a fine at least. Because a club has to be seen to be strong on matters like this. And we're a week down the line, and we still haven't done anything about it beyond some vague statements to the press in press conferences and some back channel suggestions that, we can give him a bit of counselling, which Xhaka doesn't want or need, apparently. So it's not been a good response from the club. No.
Well, Unai's got his press conference today, and it will be interesting to see his tack there because, I have to say, I do think to a certain extent, as bad as this all is, it is also a bit of a red herring in that, Unai Emery spent the last 2 weeks in his press conferences talking about Mesut Ozil and about Granit Xhaka and not very much about what's happening on the pitch. And I do think that as much as this, sort of turns the spotlight on him, it also kind of insulates him from a little bit of facing up to Arsenal's problems on the pitch.
Well, yeah. Ultimately, when it comes right down to it, the stuff that's going on the pitch should be the thing that we're talking about because, as entertaining as Wednesday night was, and it really was, we still went out of a cup competition in circumstances where you would probably expect, Arsenal or a normal team to win, being 2 goals ahead twice in the game, etc., etc. We've got 1 point from our last 6 available in the Premier League. We've got 2 wins from our last 8 in the Premier League. So if you were being really, really cynical, you might say that from Emery's point of view, it's been handy for the Xhaka thing to rumble on all week. Because it stops difficult questions being asked of him. Yes, it
has been handy, but it's not like he's coming out of it scot-free either. So
no,
it is. The club is enveloped really in this kind of crazy cycle at the moment, and it's difficult to see how we move forward from here in all these respects. If someone says to me, what's Xhaka's path to redemption or what's Emery's path to redemption, it is difficult to pick. It can only be a quite extraordinary run of results. Almost anything else feels like we'll just sort of continue into the mire.
Okay, well, look, we'll wait and see what Unai Emery says in his press conference.
Yeah, probably
today.
Something that completely contradicts what we've put out.
Absolutely.
Here, so.
We'll do another podcast this afternoon just to make everything better again. Look, maybe we'll get more info. Maybe we'll get a strong stance from the club. Maybe we'll get some clarity because I think it's a situation that demands it because, we've got to get the focus back onto what happens on the pitch and taking 3 points against Wolves. Just a quick final one, just to guess, is Xhaka involved for you tomorrow or not?
No, I wouldn't think so.
No,
I wouldn't think so. And I actually think that maybe the substitution of Lucas Torreira on Wednesday night is part of that. I would be really surprised. And if he was, I wouldn't be able to guarantee you what sort of reception he might get.
Yes. They might let things calm down a bit further. Okay, well, look, we're going to talk about it on Monday morning in the proper Arsecast Extra. I'm going to leave a 2-second gap here because the way things work, I've got to leave space somewhere in the middle of this podcast for an ad break because it's over a certain length, and that's the way the technology works. So here's a 2-second gap. If there was an ad there for you, fantastic. Thank you. If there wasn't, I hope you enjoyed that 2-second gap. It was one of the best 2-second gaps I've ever experienced in my life. James, have a great weekend, and I'll catch you on Monday.
Yeah, speak to you then. Bye-bye.